Jeffries. Walters. Jeffries. Watson Coleman. Jeffries. Weber of Texas. Jordan. Webster of Florida. Jordan. Winstrup. Jordan. Westerman. Jordan. Wexton. Jeffries. Wild. Jeffries. Williams of Georgia.
There is one person who absolutely and consistently terrifies people like Marjorie Taylor, former guy, in fact, so many members of the Republicans set up and Trumpy Trumps. That is Auntie Maxine Walters. They are petrified. I would like to see a Marjorie Taylor Greene or even former guy himself in a live studio debate with Auntie Maxine. Maxine Walters has been getting grief, booze. I mean, she gets booed when she stands up, but yet she is still a formidable person. And I think this really sends a message out. Never let anybody silence you, regardless. I mean, I might disagree with your views. Doesn't mean you should be silenced. You should be heard. And at the end of the day, she consistently has done the job of representing the people who've elected her to represent them.
Thank you for your testimony. I yield to the ranking member, Ms. Waters.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Yellen, I again want to applaud your excellent work and that of the Federal Reserve and FDIC to quickly act last spring to contain the damage from the sudden failures of Silicon Valley Bank in my state, Signature Bank, and First Republic Bank that could have spiraled out of control into a costly financial crisis, a recession, and corresponding layoffs, foreclosures, and lost savings for millions of people. Of course, some of us warned about Trump's deregulation efforts in S-2155, a Republican bill that Trump's regulators used to reduce capital and other requirements for regional banks like SVB. In fact, it allowed Silicon Valley Bank to opt out of maintaining nearly 2% more capital for their book of securities that had a large amount of unrealized losses when the federal government raised interest rates. When SVB was forced to sell those securities at a steep loss, it alarmed customers, resulting in the fastest bank run in the United States history. Since then, Republicans have tried to claim that capital had nothing to do with the bank failures, but their own witness, Margaret Tyree from Davis Polk, testified that SVB's capital shortcoming was a problem and she supported efforts to fix it. I'm so happy our federal banking regulators have issued proposals to fix this issue and otherwise strengthen capital requirements for the largest banks. The Financial Stability Oversight Council urged regulators to finalize these bank capital rules in its annual report. Would you briefly try and explain to members why the bank capital proposal is so important for financial stability?
Well, it's really critically important to the safety and stability of our entire financial system for there to be strong standards of capital liquidity and risk management for banks, especially for the largest banks. And the banking regulators have proposed new rules to address these risks and to implement an international agreement on Basel III. I would say that the proposals are out for comment, and it's really up to the banking regulators to decide on the appropriate specifics.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Unfortunately, I want you to know that the mega banks are working overtime to try and kill the bank capital proposal, claiming, among other things, that it will limit their ability to make loans to communities of color that they already rarely serve and routinely have discriminated against over the years. But capital is not something that's locked away, but rather it is a source of funds that banks can redeploy. In fact, research shows that better capitalized banks actually lend more, not less, to consumers in both good times and bad. Secretary Yellen, will lending come to a halt if regulators implement their capital proposal? Did you hear similar industry attacks when you were at the Fed helping implement the Dodd-Frank post-crisis reforms?
Well, I think what we found during that time was implementing strong capital liquidity and risk management rules led to a stronger banking system that was better able to meet the needs of borrowers throughout the country. And I think we saw the benefit of that when the pandemic struck. And the bank, well, there were many financial stability risks that did materialize. The banking system was strong and able to meet the credit needs of the country's businesses and households.
Secretary Yellen, do you recall the weekend that all of the regulators and so many people were involved in after the failure of Silicon Valley Bank to try and save this country from experiencing a bank run that could have actually crippled our banking system? Do you recall the work that went into that? 24 hours a day for 3 days, so that when we woke up on Monday morning, we were safe rather than we were going to get back to what happened back in 2008. You remember that?
I will never forget it. I was involved in it, and we did everything we could to put together a package of measures that would stop what could have become a run on the banking system to the huge detriment of our economy and to hardworking Americans and businesses.
And again, if there had been adequate capital at Silicon Valley Bank, we could have avoided what took place in the way that it did.
Well, there was an issue with their management of interest rate risk, which had produced mark-to-market losses on long-duration assets that they held. And that was coupled with very heavy reliance on uninsured deposits that were concentrated among a group of tech firms that were active on social media. We saw a run that was the largest and fastest of anything anyone has ever witnessed in this country.
Thank you very much. You support 2% increase in capital for all of the biggest banks.
I'm going to let the banking regulators decide what the
Gentlelady's
right
time.
thing
Thank you.
is.
Thank you.
We'll
Yield
now
back.
go to the Vice Chair.
Good morning, Madam Secretary. It is indeed my honor to welcome you before the committee today. On behalf of the Democratic members of the committee, I want to thank you and your team, despite the dysfunction and obstruction by extreme MAGA Republicans, for all the work you're doing to address our nation's housing crisis by improving supply, affordability, and equitable access for all. This fight to end our nation's housing and homelessness crisis should be bipartisan. Right now, there is a shortage of 14 million homes for rent or purchase in the United States, and extremely low-income renters, in particular, are experiencing an absolute shortage of 4 million homes. Meanwhile, over the last several decades, housing costs have outpaced wage growth. It's absolutely unacceptable that there is no state, metro area, or county where a minimum wage worker is able to afford the rent on a modest two-bedroom home. These statistics apply to Republican districts as well as Democratic ones. In fact, 62% of committee Republican states saw an increase in homelessness that was equal or higher than the 12% nationwide increase between 2022 and 2023. That's why I'm pleased that the Biden-Harris administration has taken an all-of-government approach to leverage critical pandemic relief and appropriations funds secured by Democrats to keep over 12.4 million families housed, increase the supply of affordable homes across the country, and lower housing costs for millions. In particular, HUD has helped house and provide services to over 2.6 million people experiencing or at risk of homelessness. That's not all. Secretary Fudge, you've led HUD to make significant strides to expand home ownership. Since 2021, 1.8 million people have purchased a home utilizing mortgages insured by the Federal Housing Administration, including 1.5 million first-time home buyers. This is the highest first-time home ownership rate at FHA in 24 years. There's work left to be done, but it's unfortunate that committee Republicans have brought Secretary Fudge here today just to attack HUD and the administration for this work when MAGA Republicans are on track to shut down our agency, your agency, and many others in just 8 days, forcing HUD to shutter its operations. So I'm proud that Democrats defeated an earlier Republican funding bill that would have slashed the federal housing budget, stripping rental assistance from 15,000 families, putting 63,000 rural families at increased risk of homelessness, eliminating 20,000 affordable homes from the supply pipeline, and more. To make matters worse, under their watch, housing prices continue to skyrocket, making up 70% of core inflation. But they've done nothing in response. Thankfully, committee Democrats do have solutions. Just this Congress, I introduced a package of legislation that, if passed into law, will create nearly 1.4 million affordable homes, end homelessness, and revive the dream of home ownership for all. Today, we'll also hear about many other solutions led by my fellow Democrats who stand ready to pass these bills into law. So I hope my Republican colleagues will work with Democrats to get these bills to the president's desk. With that, I look forward to today's hearing. The fight is on, and I yield back my time.
No time.
We thank the gentleman. Ranking Member Walters, you're recognized for your amendments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just 11 days from now, the House is on track to shut down the government, forcing millions of government workers, including U.S. service members protecting the country, to work for free or not at all. Among the many agencies that would shutter is Wall Street's cop on the block, the Securities and Exchange Commission. Such a shutdown would cripple the SEC's ability to stop fraud, help businesses raise money, and finalize rules that are critical to investors and market participants. However, even if a shutdown is averted, the funding bill before us today contains egregious cuts to the SEC's budget that would have a similar effect. Additionally, the bill would undermine the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau in several harmful ways, including eliminating its independent funding authority, defunding or underfunding the SEC, and undermining the CFPB, risk harming countless consumers, small businesses, workers, and investors. Mr. Chair, this SEC is shaping up to be the most pro-worker, pro-investor, pro-small business SEC since President Franklin Delano Roosevelt created the agency almost 90 years ago. The Commission is doing a great job. Yet instead of providing it with the funding it needs, the bill before us guts the Commission's ability to pass critical rules that protect our nation's investors, small businesses, and working families. Many of the amendments Democrats are offering today prevent these drastic cuts and restrictions from going into effect. The first amendment I'm offering, Waters 218, would fund the SEC at the full amount that's requested by Biden administration. The current funding level in the bill is nearly $450 million short of the administration's request. This amendment simply raises that figure by the same amount, ensuring the Commission has the resources necessary to do its job that Congress and the American people expect it to do. It also has no deficit impact because the SEC's budget is entirely offset by small fees on securities transactions. My next amendment, Waters 221, prevents public companies from restricting the ability of their shareholders to offer thoughtful suggestions, strengthening corporate governance and accountability at the companies they own. As part owners of the company, shareholders have a right to have a say in the direction that the company takes. Yet the bill before us would change SEC rules to make it easier for management to exclude shareholder ideas, especially those that strengthen corporate accountability, increase transparency through climate, disclosure, diversity, hiring, and workers' training and compensation. My amendment would empower shareholders to continue to guide the path of their corporate ships. The next amendment I'm offering, Waters 222, addresses the issue of foreign-based private funds that invest in companies situated within the borders of Americans' adversaries. Registered investment advisors, which manage trillions of dollars in the U.S., are currently not prohibited from serving such customers who may undermine our national security. My amendment fixes this loophole. Next, I have an amendment, Waters 224, that reduces the harmful impact of the revolving door between SEC officials and the private sector. The SEC currently has rules that prevent former employees from practicing before the agency for a specified period of time, yet it often grants waivers, essentially nullifying the effect of the rules on so-called cooling periods. My amendment prevents the Commission's funds from being used to grant such waivers, effectively closing this loophole and reducing Wall Street's and K Street's influence in the SEC. I'm also offering an amendment, Waters 225, that prevents issuers that continuously violate securities laws from being able to offer securities with fewer legal requirements. Under current SEC rules, issuers who have a certain amount of public equity and debt, referred to as well-known seasoned issuers or WICCs, referred to as WKSIs, are able to offer securities to the public without the Commission needing to review their registration statement, also known as automatic effectiveness. This special privilege can be taken away, however, if the issuer commits financial misconduct like fraud. Despite this rule, the SEC currently provides waivers to WKSIs that allow them to continue offering securities under their special status, even if they have committed fraud. My amendment stops the SEC from being able to grant such waivers to firms that have been fined a combination or combined $300 million or more for misconduct over the preceding 5 years. This will protect bad actors on Wall Street from continuing to take advantage of privileges that are only meant for certain law-abiding issuers. Finally, I urge this committee to allow consideration of my amendment, Waters 174, to encourage that we match President Biden's funding request for the CDFI fund. CDFIs have broad bipartisan support and can leverage $340 million in federal funds to provide $3.4 billion in loans to underserved communities. While I disagree with many of his policies, former Treasury Secretary Mnuchin worked closely with me to ensure we empowered CDFIs during the pandemic to make PPP loans and get the support they needed to serve underserved rural and urban communities. So I urge consideration of my amendment. Turning to the CFPB, I support Amendment 257 offered by Representative Tlaib that will strike the bill's harmful provisions to undermine the only federal consumer watchdog solely focused on protecting them from predatory payday lenders, debt collectors, and recidivist megabanks. These provisions would change CFPB's single director leadership into a commission and convert its independent funding into annual appropriations so that Washington could shut them down every year. No, that is not what 4 out of 5 Americans that support CFPB, including a staggering 77% of Republicans, want from this government. So I hope the committee will make all of these amendments in order. Additionally, I would ask that members support the following amendments offered by my Democratic colleagues on the Financial Services Committee. These include Williams' Amendment 258, which strikes the language that defunds Treasury's Federal Insurance Office. As members know, FIO provides important information about trends in the insurance industry to the Treasury Department and the federal government at large, and it's critical that Congress continue to fund that office. I also ask members to support Representatives Caston and Vargas's amendment number 72, which would protect the SEC's ability to strengthen disclosure on climate risk. And finally, Representatives Caston, Vargas, and Maxine's amendment 237, which would prevent the SEC from creating hurdles on proxy advisors. I thank you so very much, and I'm so pleased to be here with Mr. Donaldson today. That's my friend. He supports all of this. Thank you.
Well, thank all of you, and let me reassure you, I've been advised that there
recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Walters, who is the ranking member of our full Financial Services Committee.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. First, I'd like Ms. Menow to know that you answered basically many of my questions about the value of shareholder proposals. And I'd like to just, have you comment further. As I mentioned, for a party that is supposedly pro-free market capitalism and pro-investor freedom, I find it incredibly ironic that Republicans want to limit the ability of the capitalists, shareholders, who are the owners of the companies that power our economy, from proposing initiatives to be voted on at corporate meetings. A key tenet of the Republican Party is that the government shouldn't be able to tell you what you can and can't do, but in the instances of our capital markets, they're trying to do just that. Republicans want to stifle the ordinary investor and their fiduciaries' ability to have a voice in how their investments are managed. Do you have any additional thoughts on that? If so, I'd like to hear them.
I appreciate that very much. There have been a lot of improvements over the years in boards of directors. When I first came to work in this field, O.J. Simpson was on 5 boards, and he was on an audit committee of one of them. Boards have become much more engaged, much more qualified. That is all because of shareholder initiatives. That is all because of shareholder proposals. It was not unusual in those early days for a person to serve on 10 boards. Now the average is 2 or 3. So board members are doing a vastly better job because of shareholder proposals. Management entrenchment devices. I'm not here to say anything good about CEO pay except to say it could be worse, and it would be worse without the oversight of shareholders. Again, I just want to emphasize that shareholder proposals are non-binding. Companies can and do ignore the results of a shareholder proposal. And if that means that shareholders vote against the board next year, well, that is how the market responds. But yeah, shareholder proposals have been enormously important. And I mentioned that 20 of John Chevedden's proposals got majority votes. I should also mention another 20 of them were successfully negotiated with the company in a matter that was satisfying to both sides.
Thank you. Ms. Menow, Oh, could you please discuss more how pension funds that hold public shares engage the companies they own and their ability to engage companies in which they are invested through private funds? As I understand, private funds don't make disclosures neither of their investing practices or policies, nor do they make available information about their underlying portfolio companies. How would pension funds that are large investors into private funds, such as private equity funds or venture capital funds, know whether the value of their investments are fair? How can they engage these private companies if they don't know about the governance or diversity metrics of these companies?
Yeah, thank you, Representative Waters. That is what private means. And it has been my experience in working with large institutional investors that they are in very close touch with the managers and the partners of the private equity funds, both in deciding whether to make the investment as they learn about what those strategies are, and also as they themselves engage with their portfolio holdings. So again, that is a very, very market-based look at things. You know, I have to say that I work with money managers. They are the most mathy people in the world. They are the most green eye shade, resolute, forward-looking people in the world. And the idea that of portraying them as sort of flower-strewing hippies who vote on behavior, you know, based on what their wishes are about flowers and bunnies is just not true.
So, you know, based on the knowledge that you have about the position that these pension funds are in, perhaps we need some legislation to deal with that. You agree?
I would love to see that. Thank you.
Thank you, and I yield back.